through that and make sure that the money is in your hand so that you can ultimately not have to rely on credit cards or other debt for cash flow and for running your business. Hi everyone, it is Tina with Picture It Personal Finance. I help small business owners and motivated individuals think more cleverly about their money. Maybe clever is not the right word, but I want you to be educated and smart about how you're handling your money. And today, I want to talk about debt. My opinion on debt has just evolved over the years. I went from thinking like debt is how you live, it's how you get through, and it's definitely how you handle emergencies. And then I got to the point where it was like, I hate debt. I hate everything about debt. I think nobody should ever have debt ever. All debt is evil. And now I'm at a place where I have kind of some rules around debt. And I think they're pretty sound rules, and they permit debt to be used in smart and strategic ways. And they ask you to avoid debt when that can be used in a really careless way that snowballs out of control. And frankly, it's so easy to do. And I have a set of rules for business and for personal. I'm going to talk about the business side today, but many of these will eventually, you could think about them from the personal perspective too. They really lend themselves easily to explain how to handle personal debt also. So let me talk a little bit about why I am bringing up this video now, because I want you guys to know that this is happening. If you haven't already experienced it, you will be experiencing it soon. I have seen a big push by not just PayPal or Stripe or Intuit, but all three of them, which makes me feel like many other payment processing, merchant services sort of institutions are going to be offering the same thing if they aren't already. And this is for doing working capital loans. These are loans that are designed for you to think of them like working capital for your business. And they're smaller amounts. They're what you would call micro loans. They're going to be usually in the range of like $2,000 to $8,000, and they're going to have some interesting payback options. Some of them will be like a traditional, like, hey, I want this much paid back every week. Some of them are going to be designed that when you get paid, I get paid, but I take 30% of any money that you make is going to immediately come back to me. And some of them are like just a flat rate, like you're going to pay me back this amount and you can pay it back however you like, but it must be paid back by such and such a date. And because they're called working capital, a lot of people are starting to use them like they are just regular. It's just a capital injection in their business to run their business. And this is something I absolutely advise against. I honestly think this is one of the biggest mistakes that you can make. And so I want to be really, really clear about this. I ultimately have 5 rules that I would want you to pay attention to or look to follow in your business. But the number one rule is never, never take out debt for regular operations. If you are using debt for operations in your business, then your business is not running itself. It is a sinking ship. You have a hole. If you need debt to keep the lights on, you have like a hole in your ship and you're taking on water and you will not make it across the ocean. If you are in a situation where you need to use debt in order to operate your business with your standard operating procedures, ultimately, you need to figure out how to cut expenses, or you need to figure out how to grow revenue quickly, because this is not sustainable. So my rule of never take out debt for operations is a hard and fast rule for my business, and it's one that I strongly encourage. The only caveat that I would say is if you are like a startup for a larger enterprise where you have some significant manufacturing costs or something like this, and you are not my ideal client. My ideal clients are typically online service providers. And as an online service provider, I can't think of a single reason why you would need debt to start your business or why you would need debt to keep the lights on unless something is being really poorly managed, in which case you should probably schedule a consultation with me. And I'm not saying that to be facetious, but I could probably help you. Okay, so that's rule number 1, very cut and dry. Debt shouldn't be used for operations. So then what should be debt for? This is rule number 2. If you're going to take debt, let it be for an investment. Debt should be used for an investment. It should be used for you to take an educated leap. So when you're making an investment, it shouldn't be a spaghetti on the wall approach. And Lord knows I have done that. Not so much with my business, thank God, but I have absolutely done that with my investing. If you read my book, I talk about this, where I say that when I first started investing, I didn't know what at all I was doing. So it was a spaghetti on the wall approach where I used emotions to decide how I selected investments or stocks. I think that people do that in their businesses too, and I want to discourage that. You can take out debt for an investment, but if you're going to do that, let it be an educated and researched investment. So, an example might be I'm going to invest in a new truck for my janitorial business because then I can hire more people and I can have the truck can be like, with the decals and can be branded for the business. I can grow my team. I can get more clients because I'll be able to service more areas with this truck in my fleet of trucks, let's say. Or maybe it's something like I'm going to invest in this very specific ad campaign. I'm going to hire a marketing specialist and I am going to have that person run a dedicated ad campaign for a dedicated event that I anticipate through historical evidence will be able to bring in so much revenue because so many of these ads will convert. So I think what I'm trying to highlight here is it's an opportunity for you to spend money that might not be yours in your business, but the reason it should be an investment is because you should reasonably expect a return on that investment, and that return should be able to cover the original debt. Okay? So one of the ways that comes to mind immediately for me with this, because it's a little bit more easy to explain, would be people who flip houses. You're going to borrow money from a bank to purchase a home, then you're going to do renovations and improve the home, and then you're going to put the home on the market. And then when you sell the home, you're going to pay the fees for selling the home, and then you're also going to pay off the original debt. So the return you got from doing the flip is going to cover the money or the debt that you took to purchase the property to do the flip in the first place. That's how I want you to think about debt. I know everybody's business is a little bit different, so that's a very simple metaphor, but it's a very tangible one that helps demonstrate the point that when you are trying to avoid taking out debt for operations, a great way to think of it is, okay, whatever I'm taking this debt out for is going to be able to grow my business, and I have a very reasonable sense that I will get such a return on that activity that I will be able to pay off the debt that I originally took. Okay, I hope that's really clear. I know that can be a little bit complex when you use language like return on investment, but it's essentially like whatever you use the borrowed money to do needs to make enough money to pay back what you borrowed and then also give you extras. Okay, so that's rule number 1 and rule number 2. Rule number 3, pay it off as quick as possible. Don't let that debt linger. Don't let it sit out there. If you are going to have debt on the books, figure out a way to pay it off, I would say, in a timely manner. And it kind of depends on what is the debt used for you to understand what the timely manner is. But if you think about it, that you're borrowing it for an investment and that investment is going to produce a return, then you really want that return to be able to pay off the debt. Now, if this investment is something that's going to produce a recurring return, then maybe what you end up saying is that I'm not going to wipe out the debt immediately. So maybe if we go back to property examples, maybe it's more like you bought a property and you fixed it up and you rented it out. And now every month you're going to have positive cash flows off of that. A portion of that positive cash flows is going to go to pay the minimum debt payment and then maybe a little bit extra. Like, just don't let that debt linger, because I'm telling you, debt drowns companies. A great example I like to use is Toys R Us. Toys R Us was huge when I was a kid, and they were all over the place for years and years and years. And it's kind of weird. I remember when I read on the news that you could tell that they were struggling because they were in sore need. Almost every Toys R Us I went into looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. So you already kind of knew there were some problems there. But then when they went bankrupt and went out of business, it really shocked me. And it was because they had kept growing their debt load to run their business, and they were never doing it in a way where they were having these big payouts and that permitted them to pay back the debt. And they essentially drowned themselves. They went bankrupt because they just overloaded themselves with debt and had no way to cover that. So rule number 1 is don't take debt for operations. Rule number 2 is make sure that it's used for an investment. And then rule number 3 is pay it back as quickly as possible. If Toys R Us had done those 3 things, I think Toys R Us would still be with us today and probably would have had updated stores to boot. Okay, so not to belabor the point, rule number 4 is credit cards. So a lot of times I talk about debt, I'm thinking a bit about those Intuit or those PayPal working capital loans, but a lot of people use credit cards as well. And credit cards are not these evil things. They are a tool in your arsenal. But as business owners, I want you to recognize that they are a slippery slope. If you are using them to manage your cash flow which sometimes is necessary, then by all means, recognize that you're using it for your cash flow and then come up with a strategic plan to not have to lean into it as much in the future. So, what happens with a lot of credit cards is they will start them for something to invest in their business, to grow their business, and then they'll have a month that's slower than what they expected, and they're not employing something like Profit First where they're building buckets of money. And so then they have to use the credit card for operations. And so now it's starting to grow. Or just the interest is accumulating on it. In this situation, the most important thing to think about is that is, all right, this is going to start getting a little like jargony for accounting, but for those of you who are business owners, you need to learn this stuff, so pay attention. Credit cards are considered a current liability. If you look on your balance sheet, you will see that it's going to start with your assets, and your assets are going to have your current assets, which will be like your bank accounts, and cash on hand. And then you're going to have long-term assets, which would be like your fixed assets. This is your vehicles, your buildings, the things that are worth more money that are going to last for longer than a year. Then below that, you're going to have liabilities. And the liabilities are going to have your short-term liabilities. These are going to be debts that you have to pay in less than 12 months. Credit cards fit in this area. And then there's going to be your long-term liabilities, which would be like your mortgages on your buildings and maybe like car loans that are multiple years long. And then below that, you'll have equity, which I'm not going to dig into that today. But when you're looking on that balance sheet, you want to make sure that your current assets is always more than your current liabilities. When your current assets start to get lower than your current liabilities, which means your current debts are bigger than the current amount of money that you have, you put yourself in a really tough spot because number one, you now owe somebody else your company. Like you owe the value that's in your company today, because especially for those of us that are online service providers, we don't have a lot of other larger assets that could eventually be sold off to pay back these debts. You're really operating off of your cash coming in. And for many of us, we're service providers. So we are the company in a big sense. And so when you're doing this, you're putting yourself in a really precarious state that you're going to make your company non-viable. You're going to put it in a situation where it won't be able to pay off its debts. And I mean, that's just not a spot you want to be in. We are building these businesses so that we can work for ourselves and continue to have freedom and to not have to go back to the corporate job that we might have left or that we avoided in the first place. So be sure to always keep tabs of that balance sheet. So often people just look at the profit and loss or that income statement, right? They just want to know how much money came in, how much did it cost me to run my business, and what's my net profit. You'll know you're in trouble with this when somebody says to you, hey, you made $50,000 in net profit last year, and you say to them, where is it? I don't know where my money is. I hear that a lot, and I think that a lot of that has to do with people are spending it without paying attention to where they're spending it, and also a lot of it's getting eaten up by debt payments because that's something that you pay out of your business, but the expense isn't going to show up. Your credit card isn't an expense. Paying off that debt is only on the balance sheet. So pay attention to the balance sheet. Pay attention to what your current assets are, so the cash and the money in the bank, and what your current liabilities are, what your credit card debt is. And make sure that your current liabilities is always lower than your current assets. That way, if the shit hits the fan, you can just pay that debt off and move on. And then my last item is that if you are using debt to invest in the business or for cash flow purposes, make sure you have a really tight handle on your accounts receivable and accounts payable. So in layman's terms, your accounts receivable is the invoices you have outstanding. So let's say you are a wedding photographer and you shot a wedding and you sent them the invoice after the wedding was done. That's money that is owed to you. You've already earned that money. Essentially, you did the job on credit to them. They owe you, okay? And then you have accounts payable. Those are the bills. That's when, maybe you have a shop and you had to have the plumber come out to fix something and then he sent you a bill. And now you're in a situation where you have money that needs to come in and money that needs to go out. If you're using debt to help you sort of like manage your cash flow, what you can do to get out of that pickle is to be really, really tight with your accounts receivable, which is where you're saying, okay, I send my invoices out and I want all of them paid within 30 days. And if they're not being paid within 30 days, I have a process to get that money. I have a process to call them and say, hey, where's my money? I want to be paid, okay? You need to keep tabs of that. I have worked with people who have told me they have invoices outstanding for thousands and thousands of dollars for months. Months. We're talking about they delivered a service and 4 months later, they're still not paid. This is just not acceptable. You have got to be on top of your accounts receivable. This is the lifeblood of your business. And then on the flip side, you've got the accounts payable. If cash flow is a problem for you, the trick is to hold on to those, right? Like, don't pay them right away. Let the money that you need to come in, and then send the other money out. So in other words, you'll get a bill from the plumber and he'll say, I give you 30 days to pay that bill. Pay it on day 28, okay? Pay it as late as possible. Don't be late. Don't hurt his business by being late, but pay it as late as possible so that you conserve your cash to run your business while you're waiting for your investments to blossom. So that is a really, really important part. And I think staying on top of that, paying attention to those numbers is really important. And then having a procedure to do the uncomfortable thing. You know, a little while ago, I talked about the obstacle is the way. And I think that for some of you, getting paid, getting people to pay your invoices, collecting your money, that is the way for you. Work through that and make sure that the money is in your hand so that you can ultimately not have to rely on credit cards or other debt for cash flow and for running your business. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly rephrase them here for you. So number one was never use it for operations, or if you're doing that, get out of that if you can. Number two is use debt for investments only and expect to pay off the debt that you took as part of the return on investment. Number three is pay it off as quickly as possible. If it is a long-term debt, so you're going to have it for many years, pay extra. Try to get rid of it earlier rather than later. Rule number four is make sure that you are keeping on top of your balance sheet and that you are making sure that those current assets are greater than your current liabilities. And then rule number five is manage your accounts receivable. So manage the money that people owe you, get paid, and manage your accounts payable by paying your bills toward the later end. Let your cash sit with you longer to handle any hiccups that come up in your business, but make sure you're paying on time because you don't want to put other people in a spot where they got to come to you for collection. All right, guys. I'm going to write those down in the notes below in the description box so that you can copy and paste it if these are really informative to you. I hope you all are having a wonderful season, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.